Welcome to the Pardish channel. Today we explain Deuteronomy chapter 9 in a clear and simple way, step by step.
Here is our roadmap for this explainer. First, crossing the Jordan. Second, the trap of arrogance. Third, the rebellion at Horeb. Fourth, Moses intercedes. Fifth, practical life lessons we can take away. And finally, a short recap. All right, let's jump right into the text.
Section 1. Crossing the Jordan and facing the Anakites.
Let's set the scene. We're right at the beginning of the chapter, and Moses is speaking directly to a brand new generation of Israelites. They are standing on the plains of Moab, practically towing the line of the Jordan River. And Moses starts with this massive, booming command. He says, "Hear, O Israel, you are now about to cross the Jordan." He is mentally and really spiritually preparing them for what's waiting on the other side. And he doesn't sugarcoat it at all. He tells them outright, you are about to go in and dispossess nations that are much, much greater and stronger than you are. We're talking about large cities with walls that seem to reach right up to the sky. He explicitly names the Anakites. Now, these people were legendary. They were famously strong, incredibly tall giants. In fact, the common saying going around was, who can stand up against the Anakites? It was a terrifying physical reality. But then, right in verse 3, Moses completely flips the script. He assures the Israelites that the physical obstacle is massive, yes, but the spiritual solution is absolute. He says the Lord your God is the one crossing over ahead of you, and he uses this incredibly vivid imagery, describing God as a devouring fire who will quickly destroy and subdue these giants. So the contrast here is just wild. Giant walls and giant warriors on one side, but an unstoppable devouring fire going ahead of them on the other.
Moving on to Section 2. The trap of arrogance and avoiding self-righteousness.
Now, as we get into verses 4 through 6, Moses transitions from the physical enemy to a psychological one, and that enemy is pride. God frankly tells the Israelites they are a stiff-necked people. The Hebrew phrase used here is keshe oref. It's actually a very vivid agricultural term. Imagine a stubborn ox, or a work animal, that literally stiffens its neck muscles and totally refuses to turn its head when the farmer pulls on the reins. That's keshe oref, completely stubborn, resistant to direction. Moses is preemptively attacking their human ego here. He knows exactly what's going to happen. He warns them, look, after you cross the river and defeat these massive nations, you are going to be so deeply tempted to pat yourselves on the back and think, the Lord brought me here to take this land because of my own righteousness. Moses wants to forcefully shut that thought down before it even has a chance to take root.
And he makes this absolutely crystal clear. They're getting this land not because they earned it through some kind of moral superiority, but because of two very specific reasons. Verse 5 spells it out. It is not because of your righteousness or your integrity that you are going in to take possession of their land. Instead, Moses says, first off, God is judging the incredible wickedness of the nations who currently live there, and he's driving them out because of it. And second, God is keeping a promise, an ancient sworn promise that he made to their ancestors, the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Just to make sure there is zero confusion about this, Moses repeats it again in verse 6. He basically says, let me remind you, you are a stiff-necked people receiving a totally unearned gift. It's not about how great you are. That brings us to Section 3, the rebellion at Horeb, a historical flashback. So to really drive home this point about their stubbornness, Moses acts like a prosecuting attorney and pulls out the receipts. He shifts the narrative backward in time, recounting the absolute disaster that happened at Mount Horeb. And just a quick note, Horeb is another name for Mount Sinai. Starting in verse 7, he commands them, remember this, do not forget how you provoked the Lord to anger out there in the desert. And verses 8 through 17 brilliantly map out this chronological tragedy of the golden calf. It shows how unbelievably fast the people turn their backs on God's commands. Let's look at the timeline. Step 1. Moses goes up the mountain to receive the covenant. Step 2, God gives him the 2 stone tablets. But then, step 3, while he's still up there, the people down at the bottom completely corrupt themselves and make a cast metal idol. Step 4, God sees exactly what's happening, rightfully calls them stiff-necked, and gives Moses a dire warning in verse 14. He says, let me alone so that I may destroy them and blot out their name from under heaven. And finally, step 5, Moses comes down the mountain and shatters the tablets.
Now, let's pause and focus on a really crucial detail from verses 9 and 11. The number 40. Moses emphasizes that he fasted up on that mountain for exactly 40 days and 40 nights. No bread, no water. All so he could receive this covenant written by the very finger of God. Now, in the biblical context, 40 isn't just a random number. It represents a complete, intense period of trial, dedication, and divine revelation. It really highlights the immense physical and spiritual effort that went into receiving these laws, which, when you think about it, makes the fact that the people were totally rebelling at the bottom of the mountain at that exact same time just heartbreaking. It makes the tragedy so much deeper.
And the way Moses describes his reaction is so visceral. In verses 15 through 17, he tells them how he turned and went down the mountain, and the mountain is literally ablaze with fire. He looks down, and there it is. He actually sees the idol cast in the shape of a calf. It's proof of how quickly they had turned aside from the right path. So Moses takes the 2 heavy stone tablets, which are the literal physical representation of their sacred agreement with God, and he throws them out of his hands. He violently smashes them to pieces right in front of their eyes. It's a profound, undeniable physical statement reflecting a completely shattered relationship.
Which leads us right into section 4. Moses intercedes, standing in the gap.
Following this massive, catastrophic failure, we get to see what real leadership looks like. Moses' reaction and his intercession here are absolutely critical to the sheer survival of the Israelites. He immediately takes these incredibly strict, disciplined steps to deal with the situation. According to verses 18 through 21, step 1 is intense. Moses falls prostrate before the Lord for another complete set of 40 days and nights. Again, 0 food, 0 water. Why? Because God's anger was hot enough to destroy the entire nation. Step 2 is his prayer, and it's really important to note here that he prays not just for the nation as a whole, but specifically for Aaron. Remember, Aaron was essentially the high priest, the spiritual leader left in charge, yet he was the one who facilitated making the calf. It's a stark reminder that literally no one is immune to stumbling. And then, step 3 is the physical, total eradication of the sin. Moses takes that golden calf, throws it in the fire, crushes it, grinds it down until it's as fine as dust, and tosses that dust into a stream flowing down the mountain. Total destruction of the idol.
But Moses isn't done making his point. He wants to prove that the golden calf was absolutely not just some isolated one-off mistake. No, Israel had a deep, historical pattern of rebelling against God. In verses 22 through 24, he rattles off these other locations almost like he's reading a criminal rap sheet. At Taberah, which literally translates to burning, at Massa, which means testing, and at Kibroth Hattaavah, meaning graves of craving. At all these places, they provoked the Lord to anger. And then at Kadesh Barnea, when God explicitly told them to go up and take the land, what did they do? They rebelled. They didn't trust him, and they didn't obey him. Moses just sums it all up bluntly in verse 24 with a really hard truth. He looks right at them and says, "You have been rebellious against the Lord ever since I have known you." Wow. So considering all of that, listen closely to how Moses actually prayed for them. Verses 26 through 29 give us a masterclass in intercession. Moses doesn't try to defend the people's actions at all. He knows perfectly well they are guilty. Instead, he builds his case entirely on God's character. First, he appeals to God's inheritance. He says, "Please do not destroy your own people, the ones you redeemed with your great power." Second, he appeals to God's promises. He asks God to look past the stubbornness of this current generation and remember his devoted servants, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And finally, he uses this totally fascinating argument about God's reputation. He points out that if God destroys Israel out in the desert, the Egyptians are going to mock him. They'll say the Lord either hated his people or he just wasn't powerful enough to bring them into the promised land. It's a brilliant, selfless prayer.
Let's look at section 5. Practical life lessons and what we learn.
Moving strictly from the literal text, the Peshat, we can pull some incredibly grounding, practical life lessons for our own behavior today, because history really is a great teacher if we're willing to listen. First and foremost, Deuteronomy chapter 9 acts as a manual for humility. It teaches us to completely reject arrogance when we experience success. Just like the Israelites were warned not to think their own integrity won them the land, we need to remember to credit God, rather than our own brilliance, for the victories in our lives. Secondly, we have to acknowledge our own flaws. We all have our keshe oref, our stiff-necked moments, where we just stubbornly refuse to listen to good guidance. Recognizing that the good things we have are often gifts of grace, rather than things we've strictly earned, really keeps us grounded and grateful. And finally, look at Moses. His incredible 40 days of fasting and praying for a deeply flawed people shows us the immense, truly history-changing power of interceding and praying for others, especially when they are at their absolute lowest point.
Finally, Section 6, a short recap of Chapter 9 in review.
Let's just summarize everything we've covered in this powerful chapter. From the massive physical barrier of the Jordan River to the even bigger spiritual barrier of arrogance, Moses perfectly frames Israel's journey as one sustained entirely by mercy. Step 1. They faced literal giants, the Anakites, but God promised to clear the path as a devouring fire. Step 2. God strictly warned them against the deadly trap of self-righteousness, reminding them, hey, you did not earn this victory. Step 3. To keep them humble, Moses proved their historical stubbornness by recounting the utter catastrophe of the golden calf at Horeb, along with their repeated rebellions at other camps. And Step 4. He reminds them that the nation only survived because of his desperate 40-day prayer, highlighting that their entire existence as a people was built purely on grace, not merit.
So I want to leave you with a question to think about. If God's grace, rather than our own merit, is responsible for our biggest victories, how can we apply this profound humility today? Take a real moment to reflect on your own achievements through this specific lens of humility. When we finally stop trying to take all the credit for our successes, you know what happens? We open ourselves up to a much deeper, much more genuine gratitude for the path that has been cleared for us.
Thank you for learning with us. If this helped you understand the chapter better, like, subscribe, and join us for the next chapter.